Hi, I'm Kimberly, and welcome to As I've Seen It. Donald Trump is a racist, and 63 million Americans voted for him. While it may be unfair to assume that all 63 million are racist, we do know that his ascension into the White House has emboldened a rather dangerous group of racists. They have shown themselves to be willing to commit violent acts in the name of their agenda, which is namely to create a white ethno-state within the United States. Some of them have gone so far as to state openly they want a race war. The League of the South wants to secede from the Union. They've wanted to do that for years. But this idea of starting a race war to become violent, to provoke violent responses to get what they want, is something that we have not seen in American politics for a little while. Many people were shocked by the events in Charlotte last weekend. While I can't say that I was shocked that Donald just flat out admitted to his racism the other day. So it's time for the rest of us. The rest of us meaning people who don't belong to a white supremacist group or who don't support white supremacist groups. It's time for the rest of us to decide what we're going to do. I believe our best weapon is knowledge. We have to use facts and we have to teach accurate history. Part of those facts have to begin with what happened in Charlotte last weekend. So I'm going to try to do a rough chronology and fill you in on some of the things that I haven't seen enough of in the media. Many of us have seen the images from Friday night of the racists marching onto the campus of the University of Virginia, the university founded by Thomas Jefferson. Contrary to what Donald said, they did not have a permit to be on the campus of the University of Virginia Friday night. Many groups have shown them marching through. You see this long line of tiki torches, etc., etc. What they missed was that this group surrounded a church on their way to the statue of Thomas Jefferson. And that church was filled with the people who were going to be protesting them the next day. It was an interfaith ceremony where people came together to pray and to talk about strategies for the next day. And we know that because one of the attendees was Dr. Cornel West. Cornel West is an eminent academic and activist. I think he's a professor at Harvard Divinity School and he's professor emeritus at Princeton. And Dr. West attested to the fact that there were hundreds of torch-bearing racists surrounding the church and using all sorts of vile language. So some of the best footage comes from Vice Media. Vice Media made a 22-minute documentary. If you have time, you should watch it. But even they missed the tiki torches surrounding the church. They did get, of course, like many photographers there, the tiki torches surrounding the statue of Thomas Jefferson. Between the racist and the statue were a couple of dozen UVA students and protesters. I'm not sure if all the protesters there were UVA students. They were certainly mostly students. So here are a couple of dozen students surrounded by hundreds of racists, and each group shouting things back at the other. They were beating and kicking and pepper spraying the students before the police could move in and stop them. Remember, this was an unlawful assembly. They did not have a permit to be there. As far as I know, the police arrested none of these racists. So that was Friday night. Saturday morning, both sides, the racists and the protesters, were on the streets of Charlottesville. The racists did indeed have a permit to march. The U.S. Constitution guarantees freedom of assembly. So the protesters walking down the street, standing on the sidewalk, were in no way in violation of the law. Let us remember, Charlottesville had been here before. About a month before, the Klan had marched in Charlottesville. So in the previous demonstration, the previous protest against the Klan, the clergy had gathered, had linked arms to block their way. Local protesters had linked arms to block their way, and look at what's behind them, a row of police officers. This is from the previous march. So this past Saturday, they got together and did it again, except this time there were far many more protesters. People on the ground estimate that there were approximately 1,000 white supremacists marching, and that there were approximately 5,000 to 6,000 protesters. Okay, so most of the protesters were locals, residents, students, etc. According to Cornel West, he and about 20 other clergy were standing at the entrance to the park where the white supremacists were going. That was the goal of their march through the streets. And the clergy are standing there arm's length, unarmed. These are clergy members. And I was watching a clip from the AM Joy program from MSNBC as Joy Ann Reid was talking to one of those clergy members, Reverend Tracy Blackman, who had given a sermon the night before in the church that was surrounded by the white supremacists with tiki torches. While she was being interviewed live on MSNBC, the white supremacists decided to fight their way into the park. They started hitting the unarmed clergy members standing there. So on camera, Tracy Blackman had to run. Her friends were pulling her out of the way to keep her from being injured. There were multiple incidences where the white supremacists chose to fight their way into the park. Protesters stood between them and the park. They chose to fight their way in. And you don't have to take my word for it. These are the words of actual white supremacists. A far-right blogger at Occidental Descent told the LA Times, quote, "I myself was one of the shield men. As we advanced down the street toward the park, I immediately noticed a horde of Antifa, BLM terrorists, and other assorted genetic refuse ready and willing to block the street leading up to our destination." End quote. Matt Parrott of Traditionalist Youth Network, a white supremacist group, told the LA Times, and I quote, "With a full-throated rebel yell, the League broke through the wall of degenerates, and trad worker managed to enter the Lee Park venue itself while they were largely still reeling, as League fighters with shields put their training to work." End quote. So as these two groups came together, these two groups who have never should have been allowed to come together, where were the police? The police stood back. Why? They were outgunned. One of the things that's not getting anywhere near enough coverage is how many guns were on the ground. BuzzFeed News reporter Blake Montgomery, quote, "Most white supremacist and Nazi groups arrived armed like a paramilitary force, carrying shields, protective gear, rods, and yes, lots of guns." End quote. These people are not law enforcement. These people are not police. These people were not assigned to be there. These are right-wing militia members, and they were armed to the teeth. These were the people who were there to protect the racists. They were there to intimidate the protesters, protect the racists, and they had better guns than the police. How do we know this? Because Governor Terry McAuliffe, the governor of Virginia, admitted that these guys were better gunned than his state police. We all know from watching Black Lives Matter protests and from looking at the images of those protests that there should have been a massive police presence for this march. Nope. No water cannons, no tanks, none of that. The white supremacists marched with their guns, with all of their weapons at will. And make no mistake, these people showed up armed for a fight. The Klan is marching in the streets. White supremacists are inflicting violence on people of color or those who try to help them. We're at a dangerous time. All people of goodwill need to stand up. Thanks for watching.